The mahogany desk felt cold. When I took back the keys to Sterling Logistics, I expected a sense of arrival. I expected the ghost of my father to finally stop pacing in the back of my mind. But as I sat there on my first night back, the building was too quiet. It was the silence of a ship that had been looted before it was abandoned. I opened the top drawer. Silas had left a single item, a silver flask, engraved with the company logo. It was empty. Sarah walked in at 11 p.m. She didn't knock. She was carrying 3 heavy binders, the real ledgers. "It's worse than the bank knows," she said, dropping them on the desk with a thud that sounded like a coffin closing. Silas wasn't just incompetent, Julian. He was being coached. Nobody makes mistakes this specific by accident. I opened the first binder. My eyes scanned the line items. Shipping rebates. Fuel surcharges that didn't match the market rate. Payouts to a consulting firm called Apex Strategy. "Who owns Apex?" I asked. "A shell company registered in Delaware," Sarah replied. "But look at the signatures on the work orders. Silas authorized them, but the secondary witness is someone you know." I turned the page. My heart hammered against my ribs. The witness signature belonged to Arthur. Arthur. The man who had read the will. The man who had been my father's shadow for 30 years. The man I had just hired back to help me rebuild. He was playing both sides, I whispered. "Worse," Sarah said. "He was the one who suggested the Omnicorp deal to Silas. He knew Silas would fail. He wanted the company to hit the performance bond. He wanted the Richmond warehouse to go to auction." I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Below, the harbor lights of Virginia flickered. I realized then that I hadn't won a war, I had just cleared the first trench. Before I tell you how I dismantled a 30-year betrayal, take a second to like and subscribe. These stories don't just happen in boardrooms, they happen in the dark, and you'll want to see how this light turns on. The silent traitor. I didn't fire Arthur the next morning. In the world of high-stakes logistics, if you find a snake in your garden, you don't kill it immediately. You watch it. You see which holes it crawls into. You find out where it's keeping its eggs. I called Arthur into my office at noon. He walked in with that same practiced, weary smile, the one that suggested he was a loyal old dog just trying to keep the family together. "Julian," he said, settling into the leather chair. "The transition is going well. The drivers are responding to your new incentives. But we need to discuss the Richmond warehouse title. The bank is still asking questions about the performance bond." "I'm sure they are, Arthur," I said, leaning back. I kept my hands beneath the desk so he couldn't see them tighten into fists. "I want you to handle the audit of the Apex Strategy contracts. Silas seems to have overpaid them. I need to know where that money went so we can claw it back." I watched his eyes. For a fraction of a second, shorter than a heartbeat, the mask slipped. The skin around his eyes twitched. "Of course," he said, his voice as smooth as silk. "A wise move. Silas was always prone to external influences." Indeed he was. As soon as he left, I messaged Miller. "Miller. I need a tail on Arthur. 24/7. Don't use company security. Hire the guys you know from the Coast Guard. I want to know everyone he talks to, every diner he eats at, and every envelope he hands over." For the next 2 weeks, I played the part of the grateful son. I took Arthur to lunch. I asked for his advice on legacy contracts. And all the while, I was building a digital cage. Sarah and I spent our nights in the war room, a windowless basement office in the Richmond warehouse. We tracked the money from Apex Strategy. It led us to a series of offshore accounts, but the final destination wasn't a bank. It was a person. The money was being used to buy up minority shares of Sterling Logistics from the retired board members. Arthur wasn't just trying to bankrupt the company. He was trying to buy it. He was using Silas to devalue the stock, using the Omnicorp penalties to create a crisis, and then using the stolen consulting fees to buy the pieces for pennies. He was going to be the new king of Sterling. The midpoint, the pressure cooker. By the end of the month, the tension in the office was palpable. I was running the company by day, fixing the operational mess Silas had left behind, and running an espionage ring by night. My sleep was measured in 90-minute increments. My diet was cold coffee and adrenaline. One night, Miller called. "He's moving, Julian. Arthur's meeting someone at the old pier. The one where you met Thorne." I didn't hesitate. I drove out there in a nondescript rental car. I parked a quarter-mile away and walked through the saltgrass in the dark. The pier was shrouded in mist. I saw two figures. One was Arthur, leaning on his cane. The other was a man I didn't recognize, tall, thin, wearing a high-end trench coat. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the exchange. A thick manila envelope. I took a photo with a long-lens camera. The flash didn't go off, but the infrared captured the stranger's face perfectly. The next morning, I sent the photo to Elias Thorne. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. "Where did you get this, Julian?" Thorne's voice was uncharacteristically sharp. "A friend." "Who is he, Elias?" "That's Victor Vane. He's a liquidator. He doesn't buy companies to run them, he buys them to strip them. He sells the trucks, fires the staff, sells the real estate, and leaves a hollow shell. If he's talking to Arthur, it means the endgame is already in motion. How much time do I have?" "Vane doesn't move until he has 51%. Between the shares Arthur has stolen and the ones Vane has bought, they must be at 48. They just need one more block." I knew exactly which block they needed. The disability trust. When my father died, he left a 3% stake in the company to a trust designed to pay for the healthcare of retired drivers. It was a sentimental gesture, one of the few he'd ever made. Because it was a trust, the shares couldn't be sold without the unanimous consent of the trustees. There were 3 trustees, Arthur, myself, and a man named Benji. Benji was a retired driver who had lost both legs in a loading dock accident 20 years ago. He lived in a small house in the suburbs, surrounded by photos of his grandkids and the trucks he used to drive. Arthur was going to visit Benji. And I had to get there first. The siege of Benji's porch. I arrived at Benji's house at 7 a.m. He was sitting on his porch, a blanket over his lap, watching the birds. When he saw me, he smiled, a genuine, warm smile that made me feel like a criminal for what I was about to ask. "Julian. You look like hell, boy. Your father would have told you to take a day off." "I can't, Benji. Not yet." I sat with him for an hour. We didn't talk about business. We talked about his grandkids. We talked about the old Mack trucks that used to rattle your teeth out. Then, I told him the truth. I told him about Arthur. I told him about the liquidators. I told him that the trust, the money for the retired drivers, was the only thing standing between the company and a wrecking ball. "Arthur's coming here today, Benji. He's going to offer you a lot of money. More than you've ever seen. He'll tell you the company is dying and this is your last chance to get out." Benji looked out at his small yard. He was quiet for a long time. "Your father was a hard man, Julian. He wasn't always fair. But he knew that a man's word was his currency. Arthur. Arthur used to be a good man. I guess time does things to people." "He'll be here in an hour," I said. "I need you to do something for me." "What's that?" "I need you to listen to him. And I need you to record it." The confrontation. Arthur's black sedan pulled into the driveway at 9 a.m. sharp. I was hiding in the kitchen, out of sight. I heard the door open. I heard Arthur's voice, smooth, fatherly, dripping with false concern. "Benji, my old friend. It's been too long. How are the legs feeling?" The conversation went exactly as I had predicted. Arthur painted a picture of a sinking ship. He told Benji that I was unstable, that I was obsessed with revenge, and that the company would be bankrupt by Christmas. "I have an offer, Benji. From a group of investors who want to save the pension fund. They'll pay you 5 times the market value for the trust's shares. You could move to that place in Arizona you always talked about. You could leave something real for your grandkids." "And what happens to the drivers, Arthur?" Benji asked. His voice was steady. "They'll be taken care of," Arthur lied. "A new management team. More efficient." "Sign here, Benji," Arthur said. I could hear the rustle of paper. Let's put this to bed. I walked out of the kitchen. The look on Arthur's face was worth every cent I had lost. The blood drained from his cheeks. The pen stayed frozen in the air. The Arizona heat is bad for the heart, Arthur, I said. I think you should stay in Virginia. The winters are more clarifying. Julian. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like a felony, Arthur. It looks like a breach of fiduciary duty. And thanks to the microphone under Benji's blanket, it sounds like one, too. The Aftermath, Part 2. I didn't send Arthur to jail. If I had, the legal battle would have dragged on for years, and the liquidators would have used the chaos to finish the takeover. Instead, I gave him the same choice I gave Silas. You sign over the shares you bought through Apex Strategy. You resign from the board. You leave the state. In exchange, I don't turn this recording over to the Bar Association. You get to keep your pension. You get to keep your dignity, or whatever's left of it. He signed. He didn't even fight. He was a man who lived by the rules of the game, and he knew he'd been checkmated. When he walked out of the office for the last time, he stopped at the door. You're just like him, Julian, he said. Your father would be so proud. And that's the saddest thing I've ever seen. I didn't answer. I just watched the elevator doors close. Reflection and the new horizon. The company is stable now. The liquidators moved on to easier prey. Victor Vane disappeared back into the shadows of Delaware. The Richmond warehouse is safe. The drivers have their pensions. But the cost? I sit in the office late at night. I look at the mahogany desk. I realize that I've spent the last 2 years of my life fighting to keep a legacy that I'm not even sure I want. I've become the master of a kingdom built on betrayal and red ink. Was it worth it? The trucks are moving. The lights are on. 500 people have jobs. Was the outcome justified? What would you have done? Would you have let the traitor walk to save the company, or would you have burned it all down just to see him in handcuffs? Subscribe. Comment. Let's talk about the cost of winning. Because the next story is about what happens when you realize you're the only one left in the room. The frost on the windows of the Sterling headquarters was thick, jagged, and cold, much like the atmosphere inside the boardroom. It was 3 a.m. in early January. Most of the city was asleep, but the third floor was ablaze with fluorescent light. Sarah sat across from me, her eyes bloodshot, surrounded by empty espresso cups and a mountain of printouts. We weren't looking at profit margins anymore. We were looking at a casualty list. They just took the Piedmont account, Julian, she whispered, her voice cracking from exhaustion. Logi Global offered them a loyalty rebate that essentially makes their shipping free for the first 6 months. We can't compete with free. I stood by the window, watching a lone Sterling truck pull into the yard. It was Pete's rig. He was 3 hours early. He had used one of my father's old, ghost routes, a logging trail that cut through the Blue Ridge foothills, to bypass a massive pileup on the interstate. We aren't competing with free, Sarah, I said, my reflection in the glass looking like a ghost of my father. We're competing with time. Logi Global is a machine. And machines don't know how to navigate the mud. The predator's shadow. The next morning, the ghost appeared. Victor Vane didn't call for an appointment. He simply walked past the receptionist and into my office, carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than my first warehouse. He was the cleaner for Logi Global, a man whose entire career was built on the wreckage of family-owned businesses. You look tired, Julian, Vane said, taking a seat without being asked. He didn't look like a villain, he looked like a high-end architect. That was his weapon. He made destruction feel like restructuring. I'm working, Victor. Something your clients wouldn't understand. They prefer algorithms to asphalt. Vane smiled, a thin, clinical expression. The algorithms are winning. Logi Global has authorized a market penetration fund of $200 million for the Virginia-Maryland sector. They are prepared to lose every cent of it just to see your name come off that building. It's not business anymore, Julian. It's an extinction event. He opened his briefcase and slid a document across the mahogany. 10 cents on the dollar, Vane said. It's a generous offer for a company that will be insolvent by July. Take the money. Go to Florida. Play golf with Silas. You've done enough. I didn't look at the paper. I looked at the gold watch on Vane's wrist. It was ticking perfectly. Everything about him was synchronized. You think this is about the money, Victor? My father disinherited me. My brother betrayed me. I've already lost everything once. You can't threaten a man who's already walked through the fire. Get out of my office. Vane stood up, sighing as if he were disappointed in a slow student. The fire is coming back, Julian. And this time, it's global. The battle of the backroads. For the next month, the war moved from the boardroom to the dirt. Logi Global's strategy was simple: flood the market with trucks. They put 300 new rigs on the road, all of them shiny, white, and GPS locked. They choked the highways. They underbid every contract. They were a swarm of locusts. I gathered my drivers in the Richmond garage. The air was thick with the smell of heavy-duty degreaser and old coffee. These were men who had been with Sterling for 20, 30 years. They were the old guard, the ones Silas had called obsolete. Logi Global is faster on paper, I told them, standing on a crate. But they don't know the valley. They stay on the 95. They stay on the turnpikes. From now on, Sterling doesn't use the highways. I pulled down a massive topographical map of the state. I had spent the last week marking it with red ink, routes my father had secured 40 years ago. Private easements, old quarry roads, abandoned rail service paths. Pete, you take the High Ridge Trail for the textile deliveries. Mike, you use the old canal service road for the Richmond-Norfolk run. It's bumpy, it's narrow, and it'll beat the hell out of your suspension. But you'll bypass every way station and every traffic jam between here and the coast. What about the state police, Julian? Someone asked. The easements are legal. The roads are private. We pay the maintenance to the landholders directly. Logi Global can't follow us there. Their trucks are too heavy and their drivers are too scared of getting mud on their chrome. The ghost routes worked. While Logi Global's fleet was trapped in the gridlock of a Virginia winter, accidents, snowdrifts, and construction, Sterling trucks were popping up at loading docks like apparitions. We weren't cheaper, but we were reliable. Before I continue with the legal maneuver that broke Logi Global's back, take a second to like and subscribe. The big players think they own the world because they bought the map, but the locals know where the shortcuts are buried. The sanctuary of bricks. By March, the war of attrition was bleeding both sides. Sterling was losing money, but Logi Global was losing something worse, their reputation. Their on-time delivery rate had plummeted to 74%. The global office in Singapore was starting to ask questions about why their extinction event was taking so long. But I needed a killing blow. I spent 3 days in the county records office, digging through land deeds that predated the Civil War. I wasn't looking for logistics data. I was looking for a ghost. I found it in a property known as St. Jude's of the Valley. It was a tiny, forgotten plot of land, less than an acre. On it sat a crumbling stone chapel, built in 1884. It was surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusted iron fences. To any developer, it was a nuisance. To Logi Global, it was a blind spot. The new state rail expansion, the one Logi Global was using to move 60% of their heavy freight from the port, ran directly along the eastern edge of that property. In fact, the vibration from the heavy trains passed within 10 feet of the chapel's foundation. I tracked down the last living trustee of the church, a 90-year-old woman living in a nursing home in Roanoke. I didn't buy the land with Sterling money. I bought it with my own personal savings. I became the owner of a ruins. The injunction. The day after the deed was recorded, I sat in my office with Arthur. He was still my legal counsel, though he knew his days were numbered. He looked at the paperwork I had prepared and his jaw dropped. Julian, you can't be serious. You're going to sue a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate over a pile of old rocks. Those rocks are a historical landmark, Arthur. And the vibration from Logi Global's 50-car freight trains is causing irreparable structural damage to the sanctuary's original masonry. They'll fight this. They'll have it thrown out of court in a week. They can try. But under Virginia's Historical Preservation Act of 1966, any commercial activity threatening a landmark must cease until an independent impact study is conducted. And the state only has 2 qualified inspectors. They're both backlogged for at least 6 months. I filed the injunction on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, the rail line was quiet. Logie Global's iron bridge to the coast was severed. Their containers began to stack up at the port, thousands of them, filled with electronics, perishables, and retail goods. The daily late fees from the Port Authority were in the millions. The face of the enemy. On Wednesday, the CEO of Logie Global North America, a man named Henderson, didn't send Victor Vane. He came himself. He didn't come to my office. I invited him to the chapel. The wind was biting, whistling through the empty window frames of the church. Henderson stood there, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the mud, looking at the cracks in the stone. "You're a small man, Sterling," Henderson said, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You're holding up the global supply chain for a building that doesn't even have a roof." "The roof doesn't matter," I said, leaning against a rusted fence post. "What matters is the foundation. You thought you could come into my home and buy the air out of my lungs. You thought because you have a skyscraper in Singapore, you understand how we move things in Virginia. We will crush you in court," Henderson hissed. "We will sue you for every penny your family has ever touched." "You probably will," I agreed. "But by the time you get a court date, your Q1 and Q2 reports will be a bloodbath. Your shareholders will see that a rounding error in Virginia cost the company $300 million in port fines and lost contracts. How long do you think you'll keep your job after that?" Henderson went quiet. The only sound was the wind. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "A total withdrawal," I said. "Logie Global exits the Virginia domestic market. You sell your regional warehouses to Gray Shore Solutions, at the price you paid for them. You sign a 10-year non-compete for all intrastate logistics. In exchange, I grant you a perpetual easement for the rail line, and I donate this chapel to the state as a park." "You're asking for the kingdom," Henderson said. "No," I replied, looking him dead in the eye. "I'm asking you to leave my house." The aftermath of the war. The signing took place in a sterile hotel conference room in D.C. There were no cameras. No handshakes. Just the scratch of pens on expensive paper. Logie Global pulled out of Virginia in 30 days. When their white trucks disappeared from the highways, a strange thing happened. The old guard didn't cheer. They just went back to work. There was no victory parade, only the resumption of the grind. I moved the company headquarters. I couldn't stay in the glass and steel monolith anymore. It felt like a mausoleum. I moved us to a renovated brick warehouse near the docks, a place where I could hear the engines and smell the river. I sat in my new office, looking at the mahogany desk. I had done it. I had defeated the brother who betrayed me, the lawyer who plotted against me, and the global giant that tried to erase me. But the silence was heavier than ever. I realized that in winning, I had become exactly what my father wanted. A man of ice. A man who could use a church as a weapon and a friend as a pawn. I had forged my own path, but the path was lonely, and the air at the top was thin and cold. I picked up the silver flask Silas had left behind. I finally filled it, not with whiskey, but with the dust of the road. A reminder of where I came from. Reflection. Was the outcome justified? I saved 500 jobs. I protected the legacy of a 100-year-old company. But I did it by being more ruthless than the people I was fighting. I used the law like a garrote and the land like a cage. What would you have done differently? Would you have traded your soul to save your father's name? Or would you have let the conglomerate win and walked away with your conscience intact? Was it victory, or just survival? Comment below. This concludes the true story of the Sterling reclamation.